Welcome to the very first episode of our Total Innovation podcast. To kick things off, we couldn't have a better guest. With a summer of sports and a world of innovation needs around us, it's amazing to kick off a podcast that is inspired by my joint obsessions of business and sport with Aidan McCullen. If you don't know Aidan, first of all, you should. He's a former professional rugby player who graced the fields with top teams like Leinster and Toulouse. And after hanging up his boots, Aidan transformed himself into a leading innovation expert, bringing his competitive spirit and strategic mindset to the business world as an author of Undisruptible, a keynote speaker, a coach, and a host of The Innovation Show, the #1 rated podcast on innovation. Today, the tables turn as Aidan joins us as our first ever podcast guest. So without further ado, let's dive in. In this episode, we're going to explore how total innovation can drive performance and success from the pitch to the boardroom. To get ready for an insightful and exciting start to our Total Innovation podcast journey. And first up, welcome Aidan. How is it being on the other side of the microphone for once?
It's great, man. Great to be with you and honored to be the first guest.
Well, I think we formed this a little bit together, right? Like, I don't exactly remember how you and I met now, but whenever we did, we've bounced a lot of ideas over time. And as this idea of total innovation formed in my mind, you were the natural go-to person for this. So I don't want to talk too much today, though. I'm going to pick your brains a little bit. And let's start with some scene setting, right? The topic of the podcast is total innovation. Tell me, what does total innovation mean to you, both in a corporate and a sports context?
Well, I'll start with the playing field and then move on to the business field. The playing field for me is epitomized, with the story of Ajax and total football. That's where I first heard about it and where we discussed the idea where players didn't really have a number on their back. And if they did, they moved around the pitch and it confused opposition because everybody had been trained within a certain paradigm of how a game happens. And what I loved about that was that they broke the paradigm and that confused opposition because you're not meant to do that. And that idea transferred then later in my life into rugby and Toulouse, the club I played for, Toulouse in particular. And Leinster, by the way, at that time were aiming to be something like Toulouse. But I saw Toulouse play when I was 20. I played professional rugby over in France for a team called Dax. That was my first experience. And I actually went over to learn French, ended up getting a contract. And I saw Toulouse play and I just was mesmerized. I was like, what is this? It was like art. And that for me is total innovation. And I discovered why they do that later on. It's because it's embedded in their culture. They start at a very young age with the academy, and the academy then bring a lot of this as the spine of a team later on. And then they pepper the team with missing parts that they might need. Now, if you look at that as a template and you go to a business sense, you need people that are trained in a certain way of culture. But you also need outsiders because the outsiders will bring in new thinking, will also question, is what you're doing correct, and bring new skill sets, etc. Just like, for example, your countryman, Jack Willis, is in Toulouse at the moment, and he's bringing a whole new paradigm to the sport, to the way they play the game. That for me is total innovation. That's what happens in organizations. And from a leadership perspective, it means you set the culture and the vision by where we're going. That creates a kind of a boundary around what type of things we do. You have certain values, people play to those values, and you recruit very, very wisely for those values. So it all transfers for me.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you and I have spoken about in the past was that, the 90 minutes on the pitch represents about 1% of the total time in the week, right? And that to a degree, the output of that 1% is the 99% of what happens around all of that. And you sent me an article recently on that from a I think a Toulouse perspective, if I'm not mistaken, right? That really looks at that culture from the youth, the really young youth all the way through, and building that ethos and mindset in, which isn't just about the 1%, 99%, but actually is about generations to come as well. And that mindset, I think. Do you think that's something that does pervade in business? You think that parallel can be taken into business, or is it all too short-termist and sort of shareholder results driven, do you think, from a business innovation perspective?
Well, unfortunately, yeah. Well, like the culture you build can also hold you hostage, I think, as well. So you build a certain culture of the way things are done around here. You build a certain capability of the way people work around here. And over time, that sets like concrete. And if an organization isn't constantly questioning that and refreshing it, the mindset can actually hold you hostage to a world that no longer exists in a business sense. And the same happens in a sporting sense. So I'll give you an example. Recently, Simon, Italy, you might know, as a national team, had been doing quite well. Their their provincial teams had been doing quite well, Treviso and these type of teams. And then from a financial sense, they pulled the academy, all the work they had put into this academy, and they had used the guy actually who set up the Irish Academy here, a guy called Stephen Aboud. They used him. He set up the academy, and then when he left, they just undone all his work. So they had been seeing the fruits of that early labor, planting those seeds in, you just think about this as a garden. I'll plant these guys over here, and when they're mature enough, I'll move them over to the main plot of land where the garden is. And this is what happened in Italy, and it's starting to crumble already. And this is what happens in organizations if they're not looking for new opportunities and threats using tools like the multitude of tools you provide with Wazoku, for example. They miss those opportunities for the future. They're exploiting at the expense of exploring for the future, and that ultimately becomes undone, especially in the world we're in today.
Which is interesting, right? Because there's a lot of data. Obviously, you can see that, and you've been in the weeds and played the sport at a top level. But I imagine most of the fans could see some of that, and it's also somewhat true from a corporate perspective, right? Like the results are obviously slightly different than do you win or not on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon from a business perspective, and it can be a little bit slower to see that exponential cliff edge that is coming your way. But it is often something that can be seen and felt, yet you don't necessarily make those adjustments. Why do you think that's true in the sports world, and what parallel could you draw from that? Like why would you start to undo something that's seemingly working and start to break it? And is that a strategy that they're playing in a different direction that could be right or wrong, or bad leadership? What is it? What is the parallel there?
I see this, man, all the time where a new leader comes in. You know yourself. You've dealt with these type of leaders. You've had meetings. You've had pitch meetings. Sometimes they've gotten rid of the work that you have done. For example, as an innovation consultant working with Wazoku, maybe you've brought in tools. The head of innovation that had hired you moves on, and then they undo. They take out the system. And usually what it is some CFO or CEO might come in and go, you know what are we doing with this thing? It's costing us X a year. What's the benefit? What's the outcome? And they can't, because it's so difficult to see in the early stages, they'll kill it. So it's always in a financial reason, or there might be some new investors into the business, some VC investors, for example. Maybe it's a scale up that has a new VC, and the VC goes, actually, we'll put in new leadership. We'll look at all the costs. We'll dress up the bride and we'll sell it on. And that is a killer of businesses all the time. That's exactly what happened, for example, in Italy. Undo all that hard work because of the immediate return on investment is not clear. And as you know, there's so many levers when it comes to innovation. There's culture, there's mindset, there's psychological safety, there's the capabilities inside the organization, there's the vision of the leadership team that's being shared and consistently articulated throughout the organization. And it's the exact same for sports, Simon.
Yeah, somewhere at the heart of that, I guess, is like, what is our winning aspiration? Like, what does winning look like? And I think in the top teams, that isn't just about, well, we score more points than the other team, right? Or we sell more product than the other team. It's a very defined thing. You can imagine that from a Steve Jobs Apple through to a Pep Guardiola team or the Dutch football team we spoke to, and the examples you gave from Leinster Toulouse as well, which goes more into a culture and an identity than anything else. I'd almost rather lose playing well than win playing badly, right? Which is another way of thinking about that. I don't know how that does translate through to the corporate world in a tangible way? Like maybe, you know, do you think you can feel it? Because I find culture so hard to be tactile and tangible, right? And so we use it as this thing, but I don't know how you could apply it. It feels much more tangible in the theater of sports. But do you think
Well,
you can?
take for example psychological safety. So you make a mistake in the in the pursuit of some innovative idea that's never been done before. You should be given a tap on the back for that. You should be given not a kick in the ass. And say, for example, I go to Toulouse as a new player, which I did, and I try something, and it was the right thing to do, but the guy outside me wasn't on the same page as me. Initially, they'll give you a pass on that. So they won't be coming down on you, go, oh, you should have given that pass exactly the way it should be. It's more like it was in the right spirit, good idea. So you were doing the right thing here, it just didn't come off well done. And literally that happened to me with the best coach in the world at the time I had was the guy Guy Novez. And that was the culture, that was the way of thinking. And we used to look at videos of matches afterwards, and this was the kind of commentary. It was like, so if you made a stupid mistake, you were told it was a stupid mistake. But if it was a mistake in the pursuit of something that could have been beautiful, if it came off, it's like going, good idea. And literally they'd go bonny day, and you'd move on to the next thing. And it's the same in organizations. No mistakes, they're not the same mistakes, the mistakes that are something you never tried before, and then something that's just a common practice inside the organization. So that needs to be distinguished. And if people then, there's a book by a guy called Steve Kerr, not the coach, by the way, there's a Steve Kerr coach, but another book called Reward Systems. He's a forthcoming guest on the Innovation Show. And he talks about the folly of rewarding A while expecting B. So translate that into an organization. I want people to be more innovative around here, but if they make mistakes, it can be career damaging for them. So they're not given a pat on the back and go, well done for trying that thing that didn't work out. Instead, only the people who bring in profits that are immediately recognizable and tangible are recognized around here. And all this stuff is the exact same thing between sports and business.
Yeah, I like that parallel. I was thinking as you were talking, actually, like what is the equivalent of the coach or the manager in the organization, right? Because it's not really the CEO or arguably even the C-suite, right? You could say it is in some clubs, but in most it's not. It's more into that management layer where I think things do die or fly, right? Like there is a lot to be thought of in that, and how the culture's set for the team is very driven by the personality of that person, and that, you know, a new person coming in often wants to reset that themselves. Culture's got to pervade more deeply than that into identity and psychological safety, as you said. So I like that. We don't have a load of time today, so I thought I might take us in a slightly different tangent. And the idea of total innovation covers this, you know, this broad spectrum of everything from, we imagine this from the places we work or play and the way we do things today and the capabilities that we have today, but looking to continuously improve on those things, all the way through to radically rethinking things, right? Maybe in the sports world, that's the Fosbury flop in the top right-hand corner is totally changing the way that you do the thing that you're doing. Maybe in the middle there is the sort of Moneyball type thing, bringing data in to change the game in your favor when perhaps your capabilities are not as strong as everything else. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, and I know there's a lot of this in sport, that just, you know, that strive to continuous improvement. Partly because I know there's lots of adjacencies that we can borrow from other places, and partly because there's just lots of things that probably we once thought were true that maybe aren't so true. I think you told me once that, you know, when you first came into the game, a Mars bar or something was a healthy snack, right? As an example. And I was reading recently about how the All Blacks, you know, went to the ballet to watch how ballet dancers delicately lift people, because that helps, you know, with the gracefulness of the lift in a line out, for example. But looking to borrow things and remove things that, you know, we once thought were true. Those things happen a million times a day inside large organizations. Could you share any examples from the sports world? I just stole your Mars bar one, but any others that you might have that you could share?
Well, yeah, you're constantly building on the knowledge available to you at the time. And just like, say, with innovation or any type of strategy now, is there's more data available, but the data that you're using needs to be clean, and it needs to be, as it's known, SVOT, single version of the truth. You need to know the data needs to be clean. It needs to be not siloed, as it most often is throughout organizations. The bigger the organizations, the more siloed the data, and it's not the single version. And if you go back to a sports world, so I played at just after the sport went professional, rugby went professional. It had been kind of semi-professional, particularly in places like France, even Australia, South Africa. And that's why they were so far for so long, because they had people so much focusing on the sport. They were doing weights, they were eating well, etc. But the knowledge at the time available to us was, when I played for Leinster professionally in the early days of, it was like 97, 98, those kind of times. And I think I went professional in 95 or something like that. And afterwards, and we used to think this was great. Like, there was a table, and the table was full of drinks, like sugary drinks like Powerade, and which you'd kind of forgive, but not when you were having 5 or 6 of them. And then it would be like Mars. There was like literally a box of Mars bars, and these kind of bars like Nutri-Grains. But the problem was, like, they were available there, and you were kind of going, this is all new. So people would be filling their pockets with them and eating them, loads of them, not knowing like the what you were doing was creating this huge sugar spike. But beyond that as well, Simon, I mean, like, not betraying some of the guys, but a lot of the guys would have a drink the night before a game, even at an international level. And this is not just Ireland; it's everywhere. A lot of teams had that. Now, I'm going to tie this back to something you said. That is not the job of the leader of the organization to make sure that doesn't happen. That is the job of senior players inside the team. Unfortunately, back then, the senior players were the ones clinging on to the old culture. The new players, like, for example, me, I was like this, because I wasn't that talented, I have to tell you. And I'll tell you a funny story that I rarely tell people in a moment about that. But I was like, I did everything right. I used to cook mince and then put it into water and put it in the fridge, so the fat would come to the top, and I'd scrape it off. So I used to literally rinse the mince, right? So I did everything possible. Brown rice, broccoli. Oh man, I was thinking about it now, I'm almost gagging. But some of the older players still persisted with the old ways, and it was so frustrating. And you see that exact same paradigm happen in businesses where newcomers come in, maybe ahead of innovation, trying to change the organization, and you have somebody clinging to the old ways of the ways things are done around here. And unfortunately, they have the power. The old paradigm has the power and quashes the new, and the new eventually leaves. So it takes a while for that new paradigm to change. And as Max Planck, the German physicist, famously said, that change doesn't happen often because somebody has a great new idea and everybody goes, that's a great idea. It often happens at one funeral at a time because the old guard die out. And this happens in sports. Sometimes you need the old people to die out in order for the organization to move on. But to just bring a full circle to something you said previously, it's not the job of leadership. They set the vision, they hire the right people. But then what you want in sport is a player-led team where the team polices itself, where the team is looking out and going, I don't accept that your standards are crap today. But they might go, hey man, what's going on today? You're not really yourself. They might start with a position of care, but if it happens repeatedly, it's kind of going, what's going on with you? And so you try and weed that out, and the team does it itself, because ultimately, yeah, you can have all the water boys running on with messages to the players all you want, but ultimately the team needs to know what to do on the pitch. And that's exactly what you want in an organization.
Yeah, I think on the pitch and around it as well, right? Like, you do generally feel that in these high functioning teams that it's a high functioning unit, and that the 15 players, the 11 players, the whatever it is on the pitch are really an extension of that bigger system, right? And that it is a real system, that's merely the output of that system as well. I'm not sure I'll ever forget the phrase "rinse the mince" either. Now, Aidan, thanks for that.
I'll tell you on the rinse the mince. I'll tell you that this is a funny story, and sometimes you could call it embarrassing, but I'll tell you. So I played for Ireland, and the coach that capped me for Ireland was a guy called Eddie O'Sullivan, and I wanted to, at the end of my career, make sure there was nothing else I could have done or not done, right? So I really wanted to just have closure and have no regrets. And I didn't really, because I wasn't that talented a player. I was just a really hard worker. So I met him for breakfast. I was actually talking to him about creating a leadership program, and I just threw him this question: Eddie, anything else I could have done? Anything I shouldn't have done? Perhaps I shouldn't have gone to France or something like that. And he says, stop right there, Aidan. There's 3 types of player in the world. There's a disciplined player, there's a talented player, and the job of me, the coach or any coach, is to make the talented player disciplined. And there was silence, and we both leaned in, and I was like, and he was waiting for me to bail him out, and he goes, you, my friend, were brilliantly disciplined. And we both laughed like that, and I'm like, and it was like, I was so relieved, because if he had said, you didn't deliver on your talent or something like that, you would have been so disappointed. But it also speaks to the importance of diversity in a team, or neurodiversity in an organization, is you want different people with those different kind of approaches. And you see it in the best teams. You like take Toulouse, right, who beat Leinster recently in the final of the European Cup. That Toulouse has such a diverse team, in that you have some guys who are monsters, massive guys, and then you have probably one of the smallest pound per pound strongest players, who's the best player in the world, Antoine Dupont, who was the number 9 for Toulouse, and they're doing the same jobs as each other. And to bring a full circle to what I said about total innovation and Ajax at the start, when I played in Toulouse, I'd start off at number 8 or number 7 sometimes, and then about 60 minutes into the game, they'd take off a second row, and I'd go into the second row. So this is number 4 or 5, but I'd still have the number 7 maybe or 8 on my back, and they used to call it l'ascenseur, which means the elevator. So you'd just go up a floor in the elevator, and to the opposition, it's like kind of going, they have now 2 number 8s on the team, or a 7 playing in the second row, and you're going, what? And it's just confusing to an opposition. And also kind of going, these guys, what they call them, were polyvalent players, which means you could play any position, and that's difficult to replicate.
It is, but I think it's the crux of a lot of what we need to try and unlock from a corporate innovation perspective, right? Like that idea of the polyvalent player, and arguably therefore not really having an innovation team, right? But having an innovation ability across an organization. And certainly that whole concept of diversity, neurodiversity. We're going to do a later podcast with someone on that topic as well, because I think it's important at a myriad of different levels as we go forward. We're going to slightly start to draw towards a close, I think, and maybe get a little bit tangible in terms of some of the recommendations. We've pulled out bits and pieces as we've gone through. But what are some of the actionable steps you think that businesses could be taking to try and learn from sports in terms of adopting total innovation? And I'm throwing my initial thoughts, not to steal one of yours, hopefully, which is I do think the benefit that sport has is it tells its story at least once a week, right? It gets out there and lives and breathes that thing, and often innovation doesn't really do that, right? It might have a glorious success, but it takes years and years and years to get there, and often has stepped over many dead bodies on the way to get there as well, and we kind of forget, or it has its glorious failures. And I think there's a part of that storytelling and that theatre that is important, but not in the way that it's done at the moment, right? That we've got to try and unlock.
There's so much luck in sport for a player to make it through, but there's a system behind it. So if you think about it like a funnel, like the funnel is very wide at the bottom. So even today, there's a load of kids now playing mini rugby in Ireland. Very, very few. I mean, you're talking 1 to 3% will make it through to the top level. Like, I don't even know the percentages, a tiny percentage. when I see that now, I feel very grateful for having had the career I've had. But if you started with the only ambition as like you're only worth something if you make it through to the top, you'd never start the sport in the first place. So having an overarching love for doing it, or a mindset for doing it, becomes important to get people onto the pitch, if you want to call it that. In an organization, that equivalent is, well, you're going to have loads and loads of flowers. Very few are going to bloom all the way through. So that means you have loads of experiments. Toulouse, for example, have loads of players in the academy. Only one or two or three will then become stars or in the team later on. Even less will probably go on to play for the national team. But if the ambition was like to make everything we do, everybody we invest in needs to make it all the way through, they'd never do it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I see in innovation, is that there's so much pressure on the idea. And if there's so much pressure on the idea to make it through, people will protect it. They'll lie about it. They'll try and torture the data so it says what they wanted to say. And ultimately, it's going to fail. So culture, mindset. And what I mean by that is more that giving people the permission to try things and overarching vision consistently articulated. Like you said, it's not once a year at a big leadership event where you bring in a keynote speaker. Instead, it's consistently articulated. This is where we're headed. This is our vision. Here's some evidence that we're making closer to that vision. I want to call out and recognize Simon Hill for this effort that he made. It didn't work out, but he was thinking the right thing towards that vision. And that consistent message throughout the organization, and not just by the CEO, by the people around the CEO, by the executive suite, by their managers, layer by layer, as the organization goes down. That's what changes cultures.
Yeah, I think that example you gave earlier of you tried the right thing and therefore your teammates applauded that, right, and gave you that recognition, very much carries through from that example. So you told me that you joined rugby just after the professionalization of rugby, and I think saw a drastic change in the whole setup of that sport, a la Total Innovation, particularly for the clubs that you were lucky enough to be at that time. So for a slightly provocative last question before I kind of walk us out, like when will innovation go professional?
Well, it should be, shouldn't it? I was thinking about this, Simon. I was speaking at an event the other day, and I realized that a lot of the most innovative companies in the world don't even think they're innovative. They just think it's business as usual. They think that's the way business is run. And often it's because the founder is still either close to the organization or is still a chairperson to the organization, or the message or the story of the founder is kept alive. And I think that's what happens. We forget that all organizations start off as entrepreneurial organizations, and that, like we talked about earlier on, their mindsets kind of crystallize and solidify over time. And oftentimes they get caught with that same mindset for a different world, and they're held hostage to the past. And the idea of total innovation being fluid for me is that it's consistently kept alive. There's consistent messaging about it. There's consistent experiments about it, and they don't have to be big. That's the thing. They do not have to be big, especially with the tools that are available today. They don't have to be big, and you can leverage the crowd. You can leverage outside in very easily. It doesn't have to be big, expensive hotels that you hire out to bring all these people together. You can do it virtually. And I think that's the idea of total innovation for me, is just keeping the outside questioning you on the inside.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. And maybe we'll end it there. I'm also, you're going to hear me talk a lot over the next little while of trying to make the invisible visible, because I think there is a lot of good happening as well, but it's very hard to see and recognize and quantify and therefore celebrate on that basis as well. Which obviously you can do every 90 minutes, whether your team's doing well or not, right? You can still live and breathe that thing and critique and read it in the papers the next day endlessly, as I'm sure you have. So thanks, Aidan. It's been a really good first walkthrough. It's been a good first episode. For folk that want to follow you more, where can they find you? I gave you a good introduction at the start, but where can they find more about you?
Well, I'm available on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter on Substack. We have, of course, the Corporate Explorer series sponsored by Wazoku and your good self, Simon, as well, which is on the innovationshow.io. And the reason I chose .io is because of the idea of input-output, that I have these great guests onto the show every week. I do read their book. I take a lot of time to do so, and then output the findings from that with the guest there. And it's an honor to do so every week.
Yeah, it's a cracking show as well. So I'm going to echo that. Do check out the podcast if you guys don't already do so. I'm an avid subscriber. And Aidan, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, man.